It started as just another quiet night shift. Dispatch had sent me out to check on a disturbance call. Routine stuff. Some teenager's party getting too loud, I assumed. The address led me to a crumbling old house on the edge of town, isolated and half-eaten by the forest. When I arrived, the place was dark. Too dark. The kind of dark that swallows your flashlight beam. The front door was ajar, creaking lazily in the night breeze. I radioed in my arrival, but static crackled back instead of dispatch's usual monotone confirmation. Strange. It wasn't like this area was a dead zone for the radios. As I pushed the door open further, the hinges screamed. My flashlight scanned the inside, a gutted living room filled with cobwebs and furniture draped in dusty sheets. There were no signs of a wild party, just silence so thick it pressed against my chest. "Police!" I called out, my voice breaking the eerie calm. No response, just the faint sound of something dripping deeper in the house. That's when I noticed the footprints, muddy, barefoot tracks leading from the door into the shadows. The dripping sound grew louder as I followed the tracks through a narrow hallway. My boots echoed unnaturally loud against the wood floor. Every creak felt like a warning. Then the smell hit, coppery and sharp. Blood. I stepped into a room at the end of the hall and froze. There was a circle of candles on the floor, their flames dancing erratically, like they were caught in some invisible storm. Inside the circle lay a body, a man, his throat slit so deeply his head hung at an unnatural angle. His lifeless eyes were wide open, staring up at the ceiling as though he'd died, seeing something unimaginable. I had to fight the urge to bolt. Instead, I leaned in to get a closer look. That's when I saw it. A word scrawled on the floorboards in blood, directly beneath him. "Welcome." It was fresh, dripping into the cracks of the wood. And then, from somewhere deeper in the house, I heard the laughter. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The figure in the live feed was a perfect reflection of me, down to the uniform, the flashlight, and even the strained expression on my face. Yet, here I was, standing in the station. Dana's hands trembled as she turned the monitor toward me. "I called for backup when you didn't respond. They went to the house and found your car still there, but no sign of you." "That's impossible," I whispered. My heart pounded as a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if I never left that house? The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I glanced at my reflection in the station's glass door. My breath caught in my throat. The reflection wasn't following my movements. While I stood frozen, it leaned closer to the glass, its eyes dark pits. "I think I'm losing it," I murmured, stepping back. Dana gasped, her eyes darting from me to the screen. The figure in the live feed was moving now, slowly raising a hand to wave at the camera. At the same moment, my reflection in the glass mimicked the gesture. I hadn't moved. My radio crackled to life, a distorted voice cutting through the static. "Officer down. Officer down. Request backup at Willow Street." The voice was mine. I bolted for the door, but before I could reach it, the lights in the station flickered and went out. The only illumination came from the glow of the live feed, which now showed not just one figure, but several. They crowded the windows of the house, all identical to me, their faces twisted in mockery. Dana screamed, and I turned to see her backing away from her desk. A shadow darker than anything I'd ever seen was stretching from the corner of the room, oozing across the floor like liquid night. It reached for her, tendrils curling around her ankles. "Help me!" she cried, her voice breaking. I lunged forward, grabbing her arms and pulling with all my strength, but the shadow was relentless, dragging her inch by inch. Her eyes widened in terror as it pulled her into the darkness. Her scream cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. I stumbled back, panting, the room now eerily still. The monitors were dead, the radio silent. I was alone, or so I thought. Behind me, the floor creaked. Slowly, I turned. In the dim light, I saw them. Figures identical to me, standing in a line, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting some unseen light. "You don't belong here," one of them said, its voice a distorted version of mine. I backed away, reaching for the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. The figures advanced, their movements synchronized, their expressions blank. "This isn't real," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "This isn't real." One of the figures smiled, a grotesque, unnatural stretch of its mouth. "It is now." With no other option, I turned and threw myself at the glass door, shattering it. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked at the station's edge. I drove aimlessly, my hands trembling on the wheel. The town seemed different, the streets unfamiliar. No matter where I turned, I couldn't find my way home. Eventually, I stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of town. The attendant gave me a strange look as I stumbled inside. "Rough night, officer?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He slid a newspaper across the counter. "You might want to see this." My blood ran cold as I read the headline. "Police officer found dead in abandoned house on Willow Street." The photo beneath it was of me. I stumbled back, the world spinning around me. "That's not possible," I muttered. "I'm right here." The attendant frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Sure you are, buddy." I turned and caught my reflection in the station window. My face stared back, but my eyes, they weren't mine. They were dark, bottomless voids. And then, just for a moment, I smiled. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my cruiser's radio. "Unit 22, report to Old Pinecrest Road. Suspicious activity, possible break-in at the abandoned Kavanaugh estate. Caller reports strange lights inside." I exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel. The Kavanaugh estate, a relic of local legend. It had been abandoned for decades, ever since the last Kavanaugh family member vanished without a trace. People whispered stories about it, about hauntings, cults, even aliens, but I'd always chalked it up to small-town boredom. Still, I was already 10 hours into my shift and didn't need the adrenaline rush this call promised. I pulled up to the estate a few minutes later. The house stood like a specter in the fog, its windows gaping like empty sockets. My spotlight cut across the overgrown lawn, revealing nothing but mist and weeds. Yet the front door, swollen and warped from years of neglect, was ajar. The radio crackled again. "Backup ETA 15 minutes. "Roger that," I muttered. 15 minutes? A lot could happen in 15 minutes. I stepped out of the car, hand on my sidearm. Every cop instinct screamed at me to wait, but the faint flicker of light from inside drew me forward. Maybe it was just kids messing around, or squatters. Yeah, squatters. That's what I told myself. The porch creaked under my boots as I approached the door. The light was faint now, like a candle being carried deeper into the house. I drew my flashlight and shined it through the opening. Dust floated thick in the beam, and the air smelled damp, like mildew and rot. "This is the police," I called out, voice steady despite the chill crawling up my spine. "If anyone's in there, make yourself known." Silence answered me, stretching long enough to make me doubt the call. Maybe the homeowner just thought they'd seen something. But then, faint and distant, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and too far away to belong to anyone who'd just bolted for the back door. I stepped inside, every creak of the floorboards announcing my presence. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with warped paneling and doors hanging on rusted hinges. My flashlight swept across an old mirror, cracked and tarnished, reflecting my face back at me in distorted fragments. The light flickered again, deeper in the house. The footsteps continued, growing louder and heavier, like boots dragging across the floor. They didn't seem hurried, but steady, purposeful. I tightened my grip on my sidearm and moved toward the source. Each step I took felt wrong, as though the house itself wanted me gone. The air grew colder, the damp smell giving way to something sharper, metallic, like blood. I reached the base of a grand staircase, its banister twisted and blackened from years of rot. The light was coming from above now, a faint glow at the top of the stairs. My mouth felt dry as I called out again. "This is the police. I'm armed. If anyone's up there, come down slowly with your hands where I can see them." Nothing. The sound of footsteps resumed, this time from the second floor. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as they moved, pacing back and forth above me. I stepped onto the first creaking stair, and as I did, the pacing stopped. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper reached my ears. I froze, straining to make out the words, but they didn't sound like any language I knew. They weren't words at all, just a low, rhythmic murmuring. I ascended the stairs, my flashlight beam bouncing with each shaky step. The hallway at the top stretched into darkness, lined with more rooms, all of their doors slightly ajar. The light was coming from the farthest room, its door fully open, casting a faint, flickering glow into the hallway. As I approached, the murmuring grew louder, almost chanting now, but still incomprehensible. The words crawled into my ears and settled there, twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but my legs kept moving, carrying me toward the door. The room was empty, save for a single object in the center, an old, cracked mirror, its surface glowing faintly with a light that had no source. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't quite right. The face was mine, but the eyes were too wide, the expression too calm, and then it smiled. I stumbled back, heart hammering as my reflection stepped forward. I raised my flashlight, its beam cutting across the mirror's surface, but the image remained clear, untouched by the light. The thing that looked like me reached out, pressing a hand against the glass, and I swear I felt it on my chest, a cold, hollow pressure pushing me back. The mirror cracked suddenly, a spiderweb of fractures racing across its surface. The chanting stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I stood frozen, waiting for something, anything to happen. The house erupted in noise. Every door in the hallway slammed shut, one after the other, the echoes shaking the floor beneath me. A gust of icy wind blasted through the hallway, extinguishing my flashlight and leaving me in total darkness. I fumbled for my radio, breath coming in ragged gasps. "This is Unit 22. I need backup immediately. There's something in here with me." My voice cracked as I spoke, but I didn't care. I wasn't staying in that house another second. As I turned to flee, a hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing my arm. It was ice cold, the grip impossibly strong. I twisted, trying to break free, and the beam of my flashlight flickered back to life, illuminating the hallway. No one was there. I bolted down the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. The front door loomed ahead like salvation, and I didn't stop running until I burst outside, gasping for air. My cruiser's lights were a welcome sight in the fog. I jumped in, locked the doors, and waited for backup, every nerve on edge. When the other units arrived, they found nothing. The house was silent, still, and empty. No lights, no sounds, no broken mirror, just dust and decay. They looked at me like I was losing my mind, but I didn't care. I quit the force 2 weeks later. Some nights, though, when I close my eyes, I hear those whispers again. And sometimes, in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of something that isn't quite me, smiling back. I tried to move on after that night. I told myself it was the stress, the fatigue, my mind playing tricks on me. That's what everyone else said when I told them pieces of what happened, carefully leaving out the parts no one would believe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't stress. It wasn't a hallucination. I moved out of town shortly after quitting the force, hoping that putting distance between myself and the Kavanaugh estate would quiet the whispers. For a while, it worked. I found a quiet town, took a desk job, and even started sleeping through the night again. The memories dulled, became less sharp, less immediate, until tonight. It started with the mirror in my bathroom. I was brushing my teeth, lost in thought, when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the dim light, a smudge on the glass or a shadow cast by the streetlight outside. But it wasn't. The reflection in the mirror wasn't me. The figure staring back was me in shape and form, but hollow, lifeless. Its eyes were wide and too bright, like glass marbles catching the light, and its mouth was twisted into that same unnerving smile. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, as it tilted its head slightly, observing me like I was the one out of place. My chest tightened, panic clawing its way up my throat. I stepped back from the mirror, and as I did, the reflection moved forward, pressing its palms against the glass, just like before. I stumbled out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut, heart hammering like it would burst out of my chest. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat in the living room staring at the bathroom door, my phone clutched in my hand. Should I call someone? Who? The police? What would I even say? By dawn, I convinced myself it had been another stress-induced hallucination. That's all it could be. I needed to get out of the house, clear my head. I grabbed my keys and headed to my car, desperate to feel the sun on my skin and the world around me again. But when I turned to lock my door, I caught sight of something in the corner of my eye. The bathroom window, small and square, was fogged up, as though someone had breathed on it. And there, slowly fading, were the words written in the condensation. "You can't run." My blood turned to ice. My body locked up, and for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. The wind picked up around me, carrying a faint, almost melodic whisper. It was the same rhythm I'd heard in that cursed house. That voice I'll never forget. I ran to my car and didn't stop driving until I was hours away. Even now, sitting in this motel room, writing this down, I feel like something is watching me. The mirror above the dresser has been covered with a blanket, but every time I look away, I feel its presence, as if it's daring me to lift the cover, to see what's waiting on the other side. I don't know if I'll sleep tonight, or ever again. I don't know if I'll stay in this town, or keep running. But what I do know is this: the thing in that house, in the mirrors, isn't finished with me. It let me go once, but I don't think it's going to let me go again. If you ever hear about the Kavanaugh estate, if anyone tells you about strange lights or whispers, or the mirrors inside, do yourself a favor. Don't investigate, don't be curious, and whatever you do, don't look too long into your reflection. You might not like what looks back. It started with a call I shouldn't have taken. The dispatcher's voice was steady, but had that edge of controlled panic they usually reserve for the worst kinds of scenes. "We have a code 99, downtown, Maple Avenue and 6th Street. Units are en route. but your proximity makes you the first responder. I was off duty, at home, sitting in front of a half-eaten pizza, feet up, my phone on speaker. But that code, a code 99, is a mandatory officer in distress situation. It doesn't matter if you're off duty or halfway across the state. You go. I grabbed my badge, slipped my off-duty piece into its holster, and bolted out the door. My heart thudded harder with every red light I ran. Code 99S don't just mean trouble. They scream chaos, danger, and sometimes a body count. When I pulled up to Maple and 6th, it wasn't the scene I expected. The squad car was empty, parked haphazardly in the middle of the street with the driver's side door open. Its lights were still flashing, casting blue and red strobes that danced off the darkened windows of the closed storefronts. No officer in sight. I radioed in. Unit 2034 responding to code 99. No visual on the officer. What's the situation? The line crackled, but there was no reply. I leaned into the cruiser and scanned the interior. Everything was intact. Radio, body cam, sidearm mount. No signs of a struggle, but there was something off. The air inside the car smelled metallic, sharp, almost like the sting of ozone before a lightning strike. That's when I noticed it. The camera mounted on the dashboard wasn't recording forward-facing traffic. It had been swiveled around, pointing into the back seat, and the screen was still on, showing a frozen frame of something. I leaned closer. At first glance, it looked like a face, a blurry, distorted face with wide, vacant eyes and a mouth that stretched open like a scream caught mid-gasp. But the more I stared, the less human it seemed. The features were warped, smudged, almost as if it had been photographed through rippling water. My stomach knotted. It wasn't a reflection. The camera wasn't facing anything reflective. Whatever it was there. I stepped back from the cruiser, my pulse hammering in my ears. The street around me was silent, unnaturally so. Even in the dead of night, you expect the faint hum of distant traffic or the rustle of leaves. But here, nothing. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I radioed again. Dispatch, Unit 2034. I need backup at Maple and 6th. The officer is unaccounted for, and there's something unusual here. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The static hissed. Then the faintest whisper broke through. It wasn't dispatch. It was lower, rougher, like sandpaper dragged over stone. Help me. I froze. Who is this? Identify yourself. The voice came again, weaker now, but laced with urgency. In the alley. I turned toward the narrow alley, beside a boarded-up diner. The flashing cruiser lights barely penetrated the gloom, casting faint, distorted shadows on the brick walls. Every instinct screamed at me to wait for backup, but I couldn't shake the image of that face frozen on the dash cam. If someone was in danger, I had to act. I drew my gun and flashlight, stepping cautiously into the alley. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing scattered trash and graffiti-covered walls. At first, it seemed empty. Then I spotted movement. A figure slumped against the far wall, just outside the range of my light. Police. Show me your hands, I called, moving closer. The figure didn't respond. As I approached, my flashlight illuminated a uniform. The missing officer. He was sitting upright, his head tilted back against the wall, eyes open, but unfocused. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Relief flooded me for a moment, but it was short-lived. His radio crackled at his side. I crouched and reached for it, but before I could grab it, his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. His eyes snapped to mine, wide and wild. "Don't let it touch you," he rasped. Before I could ask what he meant, the air around us changed. A deep, bone-deep chill settled in, and the shadows at the far end of the alley seemed to ripple, as if alive. My flashlight flickered. Then I saw it. At first, it looked like just another shadow, darker than the rest, slinking along the ground. But as it approached, it began to rise, taking shape. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its face, or what should have been a face, was featureless, save for those same empty, gaping eyes I'd seen on the dash cam. The officer let go of my wrist, slumping back, his strength gone. I scrambled to my feet, raising my weapon. "Stop, don't come any closer." My voice echoed uselessly in the confined space. It didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. The thing moved with the inevitability of a tide, closing the distance between us in horrifying silence. I fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The shots rang out, deafening in the alley. But the thing didn't even flinch. The bullets passed through it, punching harmlessly into the brick wall behind it. Then it reached for me. I stumbled back, tripping over the officer's legs, and fell hard onto the pavement. The thing loomed over me, its shadow engulfing mine. My flashlight flickered one last time and died, plunging us into darkness. But even without the light, I could feel it. An overwhelming presence pressing down, suffocating, consuming. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was those hollow eyes staring into mine, endless and empty. I woke up to the harsh glare of daylight and the blaring sirens of approaching squad cars. I was lying in the middle of the street, the cruiser still parked where I'd left it. The officer was gone. So was the thing. The responding units found me dazed and barely coherent. They chalked it up to stress, maybe exhaustion. No one believed me when I tried to explain. The dashcam footage, wiped clean. No trace of the face I'd seen. No record of my encounter. It was as if nothing had happened. But it did happen. I can still feel its eyes on me, even now, in the quiet moments when I'm alone. It's out there, waiting, lurking in the shadows. And every time I close my eyes, I hear that voice again. Help me. It was supposed to be a quiet escape, a weekend alone in a cabin deep in the woods, no distractions, just me, a few books, and the endless sound of leaves brushing against the wind. I had rented the place off a small website that specialized in remote getaways. No ratings, no reviews, but the photos sold me. It looked peaceful, and God knows I needed peace. I arrived just before sunset, and everything seemed perfect. The cabin stood in a clearing, surrounded by tall pines that swallowed most of the sky. There was a creek nearby, and the air smelled of moss and damp earth. Inside, it was cozy, a wood-burning stove, a single bed, and an old oak table by a window overlooking the woods. But the first oddity? The key wasn't where the owner said it would be. The email instructions were clear. Keys under the mat. It wasn't. I ended up finding it inside the mailbox, and while that wasn't too strange, it still gave me pause. Who leaves keys in a mailbox? Shaking it off, I unlocked the door, dropped my bag, and settled in. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, I was already sipping a cup of tea and flipping through a novel. It felt like the beginning of the tranquility I'd been chasing. That peace didn't last long. Just as darkness enveloped the cabin, I heard the sound, a faint rhythmic tapping. I froze, straining my ears. It came from the window by the oak table, a soft yet deliberate knock, 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 as if someone, or something, was using a single finger to tap the glass. I turned slowly, heart pounding. There was nothing there. Just blackness, no moonlight, no stars, just an impenetrable void. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a branch, and forced my attention back to the book. The tapping stopped, but 5 minutes later, it started again. This time, from the front door. I didn't get up. Something deep in my gut told me not to. Instead, I grabbed my phone and checked for signal. No bars. Figures. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. The tapping ceased. A long silence followed. Then, as if it was mocking me, the sound moved to the back door. Knock, knock, knock. I wanted to laugh at how cliché it was. I even muttered to myself, "You're imagining things." But I knew I wasn't. The sound was too real, too calculated. Gathering my courage, I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and approached the back door. My hand shook as I reached for the knob, the beam of light jittering across the wood. When I finally opened it, there was nothing. Just darkness and the quiet hum of the forest. Then I looked down. Footprints. They weren't human. The prints were elongated, with claw-like marks digging into the soft dirt. My heart dropped. They led away from the cabin, disappearing into the blackness of the trees. I slammed the door and locked it. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to leave, but my car was parked half a mile down the dirt road. No way was I walking through those woods at night. I decided to wait it out, sitting in the middle of the room with every light in the cabin on. Hours passed, and nothing happened. No more tapping, no more footprints. By 3 a.m., I convinced myself I'd overreacted, that it was probably an animal, and I was being ridiculous. I managed to fall asleep. Then I woke up to the sound of breathing. It was faint, shallow, and right outside the bedroom window. I didn't move, didn't even breathe myself. My eyes darted to the clock. 4:13 a.m. The breathing grew louder, more labored, and then something scraped against the window. My stomach churned as the scraping turned to a low, guttural growl. I reached for the flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. Instead, I crept out of bed, moving silently toward the window. I positioned myself just out of sight, and with one swift motion, pulled back the curtain. The flashlight beam revealed a face. It wasn't human. The skin was pale, stretched tightly over a skull-like structure. Its eyes were black voids, reflecting the beam like polished obsidian. The mouth, filled with jagged teeth, was impossibly wide, and it twisted into something that could only be described as a grin. I screamed, dropping the flashlight as the creature lunged at the glass, its claws raking against it. The window didn't break, but the force of its attack sent me scrambling backward. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag, threw on my boots, and bolted out the front door. I didn't care about the woods, or the dark, or the footprints. Anything was better than staying in that cabin. As I sprinted down the dirt road, I could hear it behind me. Its guttural growls and heavy, uneven footsteps grew louder, closer. I didn't dare look back. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. The creature's growls were just feet away when I finally got the door open and threw myself inside. I started the engine and peeled out of there, the tires kicking up gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing in the middle of the road, its wide grin illuminated by the red glow of my taillights. I drove straight to the nearest town and didn't stop until I was parked in a well-lit gas station. I spent the rest of the night in the car, locked with the engine running, until the sun came up. I told myself I'd call the cabin owner, demand an explanation, maybe even report what I'd seen, but I never did, because deep down, I knew no one would believe me. And honestly, I don't want to know what that thing was. I didn't go home that morning. Instead, I drove aimlessly, putting as much distance as possible between me and that cabin. Every so often, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing following me down the road. But the road remained empty, save for the occasional car or truck. After about 3 hours of driving, I pulled into a diner off the highway. My hands were still trembling as I sipped a cup of coffee, the warmth doing little to settle my nerves. The waitress noticed my state, but thankfully she didn't ask questions. I couldn't have answered them if she had. Once I felt steady enough, I pulled out my phone. Despite the terrible signal, I managed to search for the rental website. But when I typed in the address of the cabin, something strange happened. The listing was gone. No photos, no description, nothing. It was as if it had never existed. A chill ran down my spine. How could that be? I checked my email for the confirmation details, the payment receipt, anything to prove I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The emails were gone, completely wiped from my inbox. I stared at the screen, trying to process what this meant. My mind raced with possibilities. Had the owner taken it down after what happened? Did someone erase it deliberately? Or was it something worse? Something I couldn't begin to understand. As I sat there, the events of the previous night played over and over in my head. The tapping, the footprints, the creature's face, and that grin. God, I'd never forget that grin. It wasn't just a predator's smile. It was knowing, as if it took pleasure in my terror. By the time I left the diner, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to talk about it. Not to the police, not to friends, not to anyone. People wouldn't believe me, and honestly, I didn't want them to. The last thing I needed was someone curious enough to go looking for that place. For weeks after, I had nightmares. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing that guttural growl or feeling the weight of those black, empty eyes staring at me. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind, some bizarre hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But deep down, I knew better. About a month later, something happened that shattered whatever flimsy logic I'd been clinging to. I was at a friend's housewarming party, trying to force some normalcy back into my life. I'd been avoiding social gatherings, but this one felt safe. Just a few familiar faces, some drinks, and no mention of cabins or woods. For a while, it worked. I almost felt like myself again. Then someone new arrived, a friend of a friend. He was tall, lanky, and a little awkward. Nothing unusual. But as he stepped into the room, I felt my stomach drop. There was something about the way he moved, the way his eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. It reminded me of something I couldn't quite place. And then he smiled. It wasn't the same grin, not exactly. But there was an echo of it in the way his lips curled, just a little too wide. His teeth just a little too sharp. I froze, my drink slipping from my hand and shattering on the floor. The room went silent as everyone turned to look at me. The stranger's eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I swore I saw something flicker in their depths, something dark and endless, like the void outside that cabin window. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice perfectly normal, perfectly human. I muttered an apology, blaming the spilled drink, and quickly excused myself. But as I left the party, I felt his gaze follow me all the way to the door. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew where I'd been, what I'd seen, maybe even what had followed me back. That was a year ago. I moved to a new city after that, far from any woods or cabins. I keep to myself, avoiding crowds and strangers, and I never ever let myself be alone at night. But every so often I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that moves just a little too fast, or a figure standing too still in a crowded place. And when I look, it's gone. I don't know what I brought back from that cabin, or if it was ever truly gone in the first place. All I know is this: Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The cabin wasn't supposed to be rented out that night. That's what the guy at the front desk mumbled, his eyes darting nervously between me and the old reservation book. "Ah, yes. We had a cancellation," he said, sliding the key across the counter without meeting my gaze. You'll have it all to yourself." That's what I wanted, a secluded retreat in the middle of nowhere. It had been a rough year, and the idea of quiet solitude in a rustic, isolated cabin seemed like a perfect way to reset. Still, his hesitation nagged at me as I drove up the winding gravel path into the woods. The cabin sat on a ridge overlooking a dark, still lake. It looked just as advertised, cozy, weathered, and welcoming. But as I parked my car and stepped out into the cold air, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Something about the way the trees seemed to close in, the utter lack of sound, felt wrong. Shaking it off, I hauled my bags inside and locked the door. The interior was just as quaint as I'd hoped. A stone fireplace, hand-carved furniture, and a creaky old staircase leading to a loft bedroom. The only oddity was the massive antique mirror mounted above the fireplace, its ornate frame gleaming in the flickering light of the single lantern I'd brought in. I remember thinking it didn't fit the rustic aesthetic. It was too grand, too heavy, almost regal. Its reflective surface seemed to suck up the dim light, making the room feel darker. I shrugged and lit the fire, settling in for what I thought would be an